All right, what's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave. All right, before we get started talking about Crawford and Canelo Alvarez, I want to say rest in peace to Ricky Hatton, who passed away this morning, found dead in his home, 46 years old, way too young. And from what I heard, he was actually planning to make another return to the ring and another exhibition. He was in an exhibition a couple years ago against Marco Antonio Barrera, which was actually one of the better exhibitions of out of all of the older guys that decided to return to boxing. It wasn't a bad fight. And very, very sad news. I found out early this morning while I was live. Actually, the news broke while I was live covering the Naoya Inoue fight with MJ Akhmadaliev. Okay, so rest in peace to him. Um, you know, Definitely a British legend, one of their most popular fighters of all time. He's known for beating Costa beating Louis Collazo, moving up, beating Floyd or fighting Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. And it's sad. I know he's had some mental health issues. He's had drug addictions and alcohol addiction. But it's very sad, and my condolences to everybody from him, his family, anyone that's close to him, all the fans, all the people out there in the UK. All right. All right. So I wanted to talk about Canelo and Crawford. Shout out to everyone that was here on the live, man. Definitely one of the longest lives I've ever had to cover. Just about 9 hours, and just to take a nap for a couple hours just to get back on to cover an MJ and a Nue fight for a few more hours. I didn't really get much sleep, so this is why I'm taking so long to do my recap because I was just so hyped. You guys seen, I'm sure you guys saw my reaction. I know a lot of people are going to my live coverage of it just to see my reaction of the win and the decision win. And that was definitely the most craziest reaction that I've ever had in any fight. I felt like I wanted to cry. I was that excited. It was definitely uh, the greatest win, not the greatest fight, but the greatest win that I've been able to experience since the years of me doing content. And definitely, you can make an argument. It's definitely one of the greatest wins of the 21st century. You know, so I was excited, and again, it was a very, very long live, and a lot of fights. It was up and down. Some of the fights were really, really slow and boring. Some of the fights were pretty damn good. Made the big hit on a draw with Lester Martinez, man. That was a great, great hit for me, man. I betted on the draw. I told you guys in a breakdown that it was a good chance that there was a draw, going to be a draw in that fight. And shout out to anyone that made any money off any of my picks from yesterday. All right. All right. Let's talk about Terence Crawford against Canelo Alvarez. I was able to, before I got on, I was able to watch it again. And, I didn't really notice any differences in the second watch of it. I think it was pretty clear that Crawford won the fight. I know that I had it 3-9 or 8-4. I know there was a draw around in there. From rewatching it, I think it's anywhere between 10 rounds to 2, 8 rounds of 4, maybe pushing it, but I don't think it was any closer than that. I know there was two judges there that gave it 115, 113 for Crawford. It was a unanimous decision. The other judge had it 116, 112. Pretty similar to the Bivol fight. I thought Bivol won clearly, but the three judges had it 115, 113 across the board. So first of all, from what I got from the fight, and I said this in my post-fight breakdown that I did, it seemed like Crawford changed the pace throughout the fight. You know, the way he started is where I thought he would start. A lot of movement, just using his jab, not really taking many risks and stuff, just feeling out Canelo. And then as after the fourth round, I would say that Crawford started to take more risk. And I think in the sixth or seventh round, that's when Crawford started to be a lot more aggressive. Okay. But the pacing in each round was different. You know, sometimes he would just use the ring and circle around, keep getting Canelo frustrated and resetting himself. And then there's periods, especially in the beginning, the early moments of the first or of the rounds 6 on, like from 6 to 9, where Crawford would come out in close range in the pocket with Canelo, start loading off with combinations, and kind of was busting up Canelo a little bit, and then he would like move and pop shot a little bit. There was times where he would back himself to the corner and set traps for Canelo. He really made Canelo look clumsy in the fight. Made him look robotic. Um, Made him frustrated. You know what I mean? It was nothing that Canelo could really do. It was just like he was getting outclassed. I think the fight was arguably even, like maybe around about the end of the fourth. But after the fourth, there was a huge difference. I think you might have maybe given Canelo one round after that, somewhere maybe like the 10th round or something. But I think it was clear to me that Crawford, for a guy that moved up 2 divisions, right, has not fought in the ring in a year, hasn't been active, fighting at a larger weight, and was able to still do everything that we've seen him do at the lower division. The movement was very good, very slick. His cardio was still very good. His speed was very good. Everything was sharp. For a guy that's going to be 38 in a couple weeks, he still looked just as sharp as ever. I mean, any doubts that you would have going into the fight, that I had going into this fight, because I thought it was a little too much for a jump, he shut all that shit down. Any doubts that you had about him, he shut it down. And any flaws that Canelo had, that we knew he had going into this fight, he exposed all those flaws. Lunging in with shots, getting countered. Even on the inside, Canelo was just swinging wide and heavy, loading up on each punch, throwing one punch at a jab, one punch at a time, not using a jab. And having poor cardio still. I mean, this has always been an issue. I don't think people. I already see some of the responses. I already see people saying that Canelo looked old. I do see people that were saying that Canelo was robbed. You know what I mean? I already seen a few people, now not many, but I've seen some of the people that's out there that are leaving those kind of comments. The cardio has always been an issue with Canelo. He's always burnt out in the second half of fights. He hasn't been consistent. I think, again, I always go back to the Triple G rematch. I think that was his best performance. As far as cardio, as far as jab output, I haven't seen him use his jab as much as he did in that fight there. But overall, Bud was flawless. The way I had pictured a fight, if he did win, was like this, but he even overexceeded it because he put himself in danger and he didn't feel like Canelo could really hurt him. He even felt Canelo power. I think maybe it was one of those later rounds where Canelo had landed some really clean right hands, on Crawford's head, to the body as well. And Crawford didn't react. In fact, Canelo seemed to be more effective from the punches than Crawford did. I think even when you look at Crawford, I think the visibly the worst part of Crawford's face was from the cut, from the headbutt, in the ninth round. So I think that it was a clear win. It was just as good as some of the other wins that we had. Canelo has some of the other fighters that Canelo had lost to. Crawford was amazing. I think he cemented himself to not just being, he was already a Hall of Famer, a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was already an ATG just based off status. But now with this win, any of the people that discredited him over the years, saying that he was overrated, and saying that, all he did was beat up old guys and all of the things we've heard him say, him, saying that he had no buzz, he didn't have no personalities, all the things he said, all of those things that I've heard on my channel, from comments that I read over the years, he proved everybody wrong, and he looked just as good as he's did in previous fights. And we're gonna talk about a lot of that in this video. You know, as far as a recap of the fight, it was a pretty clear win to me. You know, it was clear that he was the better fighter, he was the better boxer, he was the better defender, he was a quicker fighter. You know, and they were roughly around the same size. And a lot of things that we hear, you know, when we're talking about resumes, you know, I think at the end of the day, it should always be about the styles first. I think it resumes, experience and stuff, size, weight, um, all of those are factors that are important going into a fight. We don't really know who's going to win these fights. We don't really know. You know, I predicted Canelo to beat Bivol more off a judge thing. You know, same thing with this fight. The I thought it was more likely for Canelo to win on points than Bud. You know, and that's because of the history. You know, I thought Triple G. I predicted Triple G to beat Canelo in the first fight. You know, on points or even by stoppage. You know, I predicted Lara to beat him. These are people that I thought won the fights. You know, I thought Austin Trout fight was closer. You know, on points, even though he lost to me, I thought it was a closer fight. You know, um, and the history of these close fights with Canelo, they usually favor Canelo in a lot of ways, even though the fighters had different styles and they did things differently. Some forward on the back foot, some of them came forward against Canelo, and it never really seemed like it was enough in these very, very close fights with him. So this is the reasons why, you know, I'm leaning towards Canelo to win on points. I'm leaning towards Canelo to win on points against Bivol, you know, and in this fight here, I was still nervous because you guys saw my reaction as the fight ended. I thought it was clear, but I was still nervous. I didn't know what the pick was going to be, you know, because it's Canelo, at the end of the day. He has a big name, he has a huge name, huge market and everything. And it's really, and I don't want to take anything away from his skills. He's very, very talented. He's a really good fighter. But I'm also going to sit here. I'm not going to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you. There's fighters that I wanted to see him fight that he didn't fight, that he couldn't fight, and I thought he made poor excuses for not fighting them. And there's fights that I thought he lost that they gave him a win for. You know what I mean? And that's that. It is what it is. But he's a great fighter, and this was a great win. I mean, he had some good runs, and I'll talk more about Canelo in another video. But at the end of the day, when we cover these fights and going into the fight, and we go back and forth and analysis and stuff like that, we got to understand that styles is very important, And I had looked at the Madrimov fight again last week. I was watching it. This is right before I did my final breakdown. That was really well received. I mean, people are still leaving comments on it. Madrimov was a guy that he did well against Crawford, but there was a major drawback in that his performance and Bud's, but his too. The punch output was so low. He was over feinting. So when you kind of give Bud trouble, but you're not also really winning. You know what I mean? It's just like you're doing well by throwing off the rhythm of Terence Crawford, but you're not doing enough. So that was the major drawback in that fight there. With Virgil, instead, unlike Bud, Virgil just decided to push the pace harder, which made his fight a lot more entertaining. We thought that he won a little bit more clear in that fight. But at the end of the day, I thought Madrimov overall did better than Canelo did. I thought that fight was a little bit more competitive, but the drawback was Madrimov barely threw punches, but when he did, he was way more accurate because it was hard for Bud to get the timing down. But Madrimov was a guy that people were dissing because he only had like 10 professional fights, and Canelo has nearly 70. But it doesn't matter. It's based on the styles. It was always based on the styles. How did this guy fight versus this guy? And I said this in the breakdown. They don't fight alike. Madrimov and Canelo don't fight alike. you know. Um, so I think at the end of the day, we have to do the analysis and their picks. We're gonna be wrong, but when we say a guy doesn't have a good resume, that he doesn't fight anyone, that he is too small, too inactive, we got to understand that a fight still may end up being like this. This is the result from a guy that is rusty, fights once a year, 38 years old, has never fought and jumped up. Everybody has jumped up 2 divisions. Not everybody, but most of these guys that have done it, they weren't successful. They weren't successful in doing it. And that was a major thing for me. It was even a thing for Bud at one point. He said that he wanted to catch weight. For him to fight Canelo, jump up in 2 divisions, and not ask for a rehydration clause and not ask for a catch weight and be able to beat this guy that wasn't really that bigger than him, but was used to fighting guys that was much bigger than him and was successful in fighting all those guys. Plant, Ryder, Saunders, Smith, Belenga, Munguia, all of those guys were bigger than Bud. Some of them boxed well. A lot of them were undefeated. But Bud was able to go in there and still beat these guys better than a lot of those guys. And at times was way more aggressive than a lot of those guys, without the exception of maybe Jaime Munguia, who was very aggressive towards Canelo. But the majority of those guys like Skull and Saunders and Smith and Plant, Bud was more aggressive than more of these guys. And I see guys saying that he was running. Yeah, there was points and periods where he was moving a lot, but it was periods in specific rounds, not throughout the fight. When he was aggressive, he was beating him up too. He was in the pocket with him, and he was winning those exchanges. That was one of the things that shocked me, was that I was concerned about those moments. Those are the periods where I thought that Canelo, might catch him off a good shot with the exchanges. So Bud beat him there too. Bud was doing a little bit of what I said everybody did well in previous fights. Like Plant, when he would lead back, he was doing, he had that shell defense and he was leaning back and using that head control and countering with those short right hands. Bud was doing it with the left hand, Bud was using some of the movement that Lara made and using his jab and being raging and then changing directions. He was doing some of that. He was out jabbing Canelo like a Triple G was doing, and probing like the way Bivol was doing at periods. He was doing a little bit of all of those guys that beat Canelo in the past or gave Canelo struggle and problems in the past. But he wasn't committing to doing the same thing over and over again. He kept changing. He was like Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat. He just kept changing throughout each round. Not each round, but each period in the round. 1 minute, in the first minute, he's being aggressive. He's coming at Canelo. He's doing flurries in the pocket. The next minute, he's moving, pot shotting, and then the next minute, he's probing, touching the gloves of Canelo, and out jabbing him and shooting straight lefts. You know what I mean? It's the way he did it, what made it work. It makes him, it doesn't have to be us fans and us content creators. We got guys like Usyk who's saying he's the best of the world. He's the best of the world. His IQ is out of this world. Usyk is saying it, and Usyk is one of the best of this century, period. He's up there. And if he's saying it, and you gotta look at it and just be like, he was right. A lot of people were right. So shout out to all the people that picked him and stuck by him. Some people do it off the knowledge. Some people just does it out of the belief and the feeling. I felt like he was going to win, but logically, I felt like Canelo was going to win on points. It was a phenomenal performance, and I'm going to end it with this. And I spoke on this yesterday. Shout out to Turkey Al-Sheikh. Again, because not everyone's going to get this opportunity, man. It took $200 million to get in a ring with someone like this. It would have never happened with all these promoters that we have. Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, Bob Arum, all of these guys, all of them, right? All the people that's involved with the sport, it would have never happened with anybody else. It wasn't going to happen without him. You know, this guy was being ducked. Let's be real. And he said it in the interview. He's like, yo, I didn't get my opportunity. I think he was doing a sit down with Sean Porter. And I noticed when Bud does interviews with certain people that he's comfortable with and that he's friends with, you can tell like his perfect personality is a little different. Like, so he's cool with Sean. And he was just saying, like, if I had got my opportunity earlier with Manny Pacquiao, I could have shown the world who I truly was, but they didn't want to make that fight. They didn't want to make the fight with Errol Spence early. They didn't want to make the fight with Keith Thurman. They didn't want to make the fight with Danny Garcia. They didn't want all of that. There's a lot of fights and a lot of fighters that were contacted and was sent good offers throughout Bud's career. And a lot of these fighters didn't want to do it. You know what I mean? They just didn't want to do it. And they had to pick up whoever that was good, that wasn't part of the PBC, like an older version of Kell Brook and Amir Khan and Sean Porter that was on the brink of retirement. They had to get those guys because he couldn't get Keith. They sent offers to Keith. They wanted to get Danny in there. You know what I mean? They couldn't make the fights happen. And this is not normal. Crawford, who was very accomplished and becoming 2-time undisputed, was still looked at as a guy that didn't have a good resume. A 2-division undisputed, not 2 times undisputed, a 2-division undisputed. Becoming undisputed and losing the belt and picking it back up again is a 2-time undisputed. Becoming a multi-divisional undisputed is a totally different thing. You're going up in weight, and now you're becoming undisputed in a different weight. That's amazing. So if it wasn't for Turkey, we wouldn't have gotten a Bivol and Better Be if even though those two was clearly the best 2 fighters in the division. We would have never gotten it. We would have never got the Usyk moment and beaten Tyson Fury. Even though Tyson Fury was the name and a bigger star, we wouldn't have gotten a fight because Fury wasn't going to take that fight. Fury delayed it as long as possible, right? Fighting Derek Chisora for a 3rd time. So not everybody is going to get their moment to make history, and that's very, very unfortunate because some people are really good out there. There are people that I think would have had a good chance of being Canelo if they had the opportunity, but not everybody's going to get the opportunity. You know what I mean? To make history. So when we got a 3-time 4-belt era undisputed champion, 3 different divisions, all right, and a 5-division champ, and a multi-divisional lineal champion. When we have that, it's because someone was there to be willing to give this guy a chance and someone had the funds to make it happen. So I give credit for Canelo for even giving Bud the opportunity to make history. But at the same time, he had to get paid a lot of money, an extreme a lot of money in order to make it happen. Same thing with Fury. He had to get paid so much that he couldn't turn it down, in order for these guys to make history. So when we talk about history and we compare Bud to Floyd and Manny and Muhammad Ali and Usyk and all these other guys, Sugar Ray, we got to understand that not everybody's going to have these opportunities. And his opportunity came late, but it was well worth it. In fact, it marinated and it actually ended up being bigger because if he had 4 of those other guys I named earlier, like Pacquiao and Spence, yeah, they would have been legendary wins if he did it earlier. But, I don't know. Like, we don't know how those fights would have went. And, at the end of the day, maybe his legacy, maybe people would have respected him more earlier, but that motivation pushed him to be this good against a Canelo Alvarez. So it took some time, it marinated, but when he got there, he went from From everybody to Spence was a huge jump. Then from Spence to Canelo was a huge jump. And it made the win so much better. You know, so shout out to Crawford. He has a phenomenal resume. And, you know, his accolades are crazy. And I personally believe that he's at the top, is the highest tier of legends. He has cemented, there are legends. I don't want to name names because I don't want to feel anyone to feel disrespected. But there are legends. There are generational greats. There are pound for pound. There are Hall of Famers. But there's people that is at the level where they're at the tier where they only compare to a few other fighters. You know what I mean? Ali beating Liston, beating Foreman, you know, in a fight where people thought he was gonna die. That is a GOAT win. You know what I mean? That is a GOAT win. You know, Sugar Ray coming back to beat Marvin Hagler, jumping up in weight to beat Marvin Hagler. That is a GOAT win. Not everybody has GOAT wins like that. You know, people have picked up wins and picked up titles and done it in but I mean, these weight jumps or fights where no one think you are gonna win the fight. You know, or very few people think. The majority, he's put himself in that category of greats. You know, and I think those categories. I'm not saying who's better. What I'm saying is he's in the conversation now of the Alis, the Floyds, the Manny Pacquiao's. I even think Usyk is in the conversation. You know, I've already said that Usyk is in the conversation of heavyweights and stuff. He's in that conversation. So I think guys that got these phenomenal wins and achieved these great feats and stuff, I think he's in that level. You know, again, there's top tier fighters, there's elite fighters, there's Hall of Famers, you know, there's pound for pound, top 5 guys and stuff. But what Crawford did, jumping up 2 divisions, already being a 4-division champ and a 2-time undisputed, just to jump up 2 more, no rehydration clause, no catch weight. This is a GOAT win. And it's up there to be one of the greatest achievements up there by beating Canelo. Clearly. Just not disputed. Like, this is a clear win and becoming the first 3-time undisputed champion in the four belt era. It's crazy. We're still having issues. We're still having issues in trying to get people to unify with 1 belt. You know, he's unified all 4 belts in 3 weight classes, right? And has been lineal in multiple weight classes. That guy is a GOAT. He's the greatest in this generation, in my opinion. You know, and Usyk is right there between 1-2, 1A, 1-2, 1B, or whatever. Usyk is right there. But since the Floyd Manny Pacquiao, I think this guy is the greatest. All right. So anyway, I'm gonna make more videos, you know, about this stuff. More about what Crawford should do. That's gonna be in a separate video. But again, shout out and peace to everybody who was here. Everybody that donated last night, crazy. Thank you for the donations and the support. You know, and listen, I'm dead tired right now. I don't know if you guys can tell. I'm dead tired. You know, doing the Newer fight was crazy, but listen, man, we did it, man. Had another great day of boxing. Shout out to everyone that is new here to the channel. Welcome. Shout out to all my old school supporters that's here every time I go live. Shout out to all of you guys. There's too many of you guys to name. All right. And yeah, and that's it, man. All right. I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.